We often watch reporters in the Middle East reporting on a new issue, but what exactly are they talking about? Although the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is indeed a long and fact-filled conflict, the BS nobody cares about, I'll still try to explain it to you within 10 minutes. Let's actually start by defining some terms. An Israeli is a citizen of Israel. Israelis are mainly Jewish, although 20% are Muslim and Christians, and are descendants of the Hebrews, which are biblical Jews. Palestinian, on the other hand, is someone who either lives or lived in Palestine or has Palestinian heritage. They speak Arabic and are often Muslims or followers of Islam. Now that we have done that, let's start by explaining how the Ottoman Empire controlled historical Palestine for about 400 years. For that time, Palestine was controlled by the Arabs, or the Muslims, and was also located right next to Arabian states: Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, and Saudi Arabia. By the end of the 1800s, a man known as Theodor Herzl published an article known as The State of the Jews, where he demanded the union and advocated the establishment of a Jewish government and a state within the Middle East. This resulted in a massive immigration of Jews into Palestine. But why a government and state in the Middle East? Why not someplace else? Well, biblically speaking, Jacob and the children of Israel, the original Jews, were given Israel by God Himself. However, over time, famine forced Jacob and the children to move to Egypt, where for 4 generations they were slaves to the Egyptians. Eventually, Moses, the grandson of Jacob, led them across the Red Sea back to Israel, where they reigned for the next 2,000 years. However, after the Romans came, the Jews lost control of the land only up until the 21st century. Now, Theodor Herzl was one of the first Zionists. Zionists are believers of Zionism, or the belief that the Jewish people should have a national home of their own. This originated as a result of Europe's anti-Semitism or hostility against the Jews. Anyways, the Ottoman Empire, who had previously controlled Palestine, allies with the Central Powers, who end up losing World War I. The British end up gaining Palestine, and in 1917, Arthur James Balfour issues a declaration to Baron Rothschild saying that the British support the creation of a Jewish state. This causes a massive surge of Jews into Palestine, especially from Europe, to escape Hitler and his Nazis. In response to Zionist immigration and settlement, Palestinian nationalism emerged during the interwar period. The indigenous inhabitants of Palestine resisted Zionist settlement almost from the beginning. In the countryside, the Palestinians engaged the settlers with forced reoccupation and the repossession of their lands, assaults against settlers, the sabotage of crops, while in cities, acts of arson were committed and access to holy sites were restricted. By the time World War II had ended, the Holocaust allows the Jews to argue for the need of a Jewish safe haven, as 6 million Jews were killed during this time. World War II also resulted in Britain giving up its mandate on the state of Palestine to the United Nations. In 1947, after years of arguing for the establishment of a Jewish state, the United Nations decided to partition Palestine into 2 states in UN Resolution 181, which gave the Jews 57% of the land, while the Arabs would get about 43% of the land. Finally, on May 14, 1948, the State of Israel was finally born. However, because no borders were defined, tensions broke out as a Jewish state among many Arabian states created fury. It also consequently started the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, or I like to say, Israel versus Syria, Jordan, Iraq, and Egypt. The 1948 war was known by the Israelis as the War of Independence, which resulted in the establishment of the State of Israel within its commonly recognized borders by Israel's neighboring countries. Although at first reluctant, Israel's neighboring countries were forced to accept after the embarrassing defeat. After that point, tensions between Israelis and Palestinians continued to rage on, because the Palestinians had literally gotten kicked out of the land which they had lived on for years, and now had been forced to live under the rule of the Jews. Up until June 4th, 1967, Israel finally launched a surprise attack on their Arab neighbors. Jordan and Egypt retaliated and fought back, but in the end, Israel obtains the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, now meaning that it has acquired 100% of what was formerly historical Palestine. This was also known as the 1967 Six-Day War. Even till this day, the Israelis and the Palestinians have resented each other. A two-state solution has often been proposed, in which Israeli leaders have proposed a separation of Israel and giving a good portion of it to Palestine as a state. This would create two states so that each nation could house their own people. Despite that, Palestinian leaders have disagreed. And that's pretty much